Thank you very much for responding to our call. So, hopefully you're suitably refreshed and of a mind now to focus or refocus on our topic and enjoy the session to follow. So our overall theme remains, obviously, the voice of engineers and its relevance to or being attached to the policies of this country. And in fact, that's very much the topic that will be dealt with by our next presenter, who is a transport sector professional with over 30 years of experience, and he's very much in academia, as you probably recognize, in engineer Professor Amal S. Kumarage, currently a senior professor with the University of Moratuwa. In fact, he's an alumnus of that same university, having completed his studies in civil engineering. He then went on to the University of Calgary and read for his PhD in transport planning and engineering. He's a chartered engineer and a fellow, as well as a former chairman of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. And as far as I know, Dr. Kumarage's voice has been heard, and he has often had to face the indignity of his voice not being heeded. But however, there have been incremental movements that have been effected, and so we do know that he has a fair amount of success over a long period of advocacy, and so he will probably share that himself. So he's senior professor in the Department of Transport and Logistics, as I said, at the University of Moratuwa. He's also an honorary professor with the University of Wollongong in Australia, and also has served with the Ministry of Transport and been an advisor to the government as well. So, developing a culture of policy-led development, that's a strange term, isn't it? Developing a culture of policy-led development, because we have ad hoc development doing a lot better than a culture of policy-led development in Sri Lanka, and intervention in the transport sector. Let's hear it from Professor Amal Kumarage.
Thank you, Arun. Each time you introduce me, I feel significantly older by stressing on the number of years and the long campaigns for various things I speak for. I've been asked to speak on policy impacts in the transport sector in general and in specific, and about in Sri Lanka, particularly in the infrastructure sector in general. This is probably the most difficult or the most challenging hour of the day, standing between a good lunch and a senior minister of the government to speak, but I'll do my best. And it's a bit more difficult because it's a very boring subject. Who wants to listen to policy at this hour of the day anyway? But nevertheless, I will share some of my thoughts in this area. And I will begin a little academically. I hope that won't put you to sleep, though, by asking the question, what is policy? Different people have different ideas about what is policy. And often people say, you know, I wish the government had a policy on this. It's because we don't have a policy, and policies are changing, and so on. So in terms of how I teach transport policy, I say it is part of a government's stated approach towards satisfying the needs of the people. And that is essentially what any policy should be. A government should have a policy about health, about education, about transport, for anything that the people want it to be responsible for. So therefore, the policy initiative has to be with the government, right? Now, some people also think that policies are like a set of religious documents that should not ever be changed. or they think they should be like, they are like carved in stone that should be preserved forever. But policies, to be effective and to deliver what people want, have actually got to change. They have to change with the different influences that require change. We know political changes require change. Different governments get elected on different political agendas. Technology brings about change, how to do things. New opportunities arise. Society keeps changing. The expectations of society keep changing from time to time. And often that is tied up with political change. Of course, the economic changes, the desire of a government to emphasize particular development agendas, develop different sectors, position themselves globally, change, and the policies required for that, particularly in trade and so on, will change. There are also different changes that need to come in terms of procurement, in terms of regulation, and so on. So policies, while they need to be fixed, at least for a period of time, need also to be updated and renewed from time to time. Now, different countries have different ways of handling transport policy. There is what we call the explicit policy, where policy is written out and approved by Parliament. And in some places, like under the Westminster practice, we have this white paper business that is there. But in many developing countries, policies are not generally explicit. They are left for interpretations. They are left for more fluid change and not really publicly available. And these are generally more implicit policies that are there. For example, an act of parliament would be an explicit policy, right? But when funds are voted for a program of road building or construction of an airport or whatever, that is also a policy statement of a government, although it's not written out why that airport is built, for what purpose it's built, but merely by the fact that government has approved funding, it's also considered a policy. Now, we also need to work through what are policies in terms of how they differ from plans and projects and programs. A lot of people inadvertently refer to plans as policies and policies as programs and so on. As I said, explicit policies require Parliament approval. I was once part of developing a transport policy, and this was approved by the Cabinet of Ministers. And when we tried to call it the transport policy, the Attorney General reminded us that whatever the title we give a document does not become a policy unless it is approved by Parliament. And very often we don't have a process for that kind of explicit policy to be passed by Parliament, right? There must be under an act, a regulation-making power that a minister is given in order to present it to Parliament and make the required, get the required approvals. So we have a bit of a lacuna in that area as to what processes there are to have these explicit policies passed. And I think we are at a disadvantage in that, and it might be good to hear what the Honourable Minister would like to say in terms of that facility that needs to be created for the future. Plans, master plans, strategic plans, and so on, also do not become policy unless they are, again, tabled in Parliament. And they too also may have that same problem, right? On the other hand, projects, programs for which money is voted annually through the budget become a part of policy. So in a way, you may have policy that is written down and even accepted by the Cabinet of Ministers, not having any legal power, whereas a project that is even hastily prepared and gets into the budget estimates becoming de facto policy. So these are some of the overall problems we have. Now, if you look at the transport sector, even though some of these may not be applicable to engineering directly, we have a number of what we call implicit policies. Some of them have been there for a long time. Different governments have introduced them, some have disappeared, new ones have appeared. This is the way in which the government delivers mobility to the people. They include certain amount of subsidy given, they refer to taxes, they refer to given opportunities for business, and so on. So these things are basically questioned from time to time, revised from time to time. Most of it is done through budgets and procedural means and not through any kind of discussion in Parliament or approval of Parliament. Now, getting more on to where we need to be heading from here. Policy. If you look at how policy has evolved over the last 3, 4, 5 decades, initially policy was mostly in terms of how government delivered services. At a time when private wealth was limited, when private sector services were limited, and governments were expected to provide most of the services, policy was mostly in terms of how government worked or operated itself in giving these policies. But later on, particularly in the last 3, 4 decades, most governments have moved on from there to more controlling or a regulatory framework where they try to balance the inputs of the private sector, right? And even in Sri Lanka, we've had that with the private sector coming in, for example, into transport, into bus transport, into aviation, and so on. We have regulators who put out the permits and the standards and so on. But now, many countries are thinking of policy as a much more far-reaching instrument, which will bring about not just administrative control, but social change, of making policy a reform process, so that through policy, the people would actually be able to get what they want for what they consider as a better quality of life. Right? It's more a facilitator. It's more a terms of opening doors and taking a step back and letting different people provide services and so on. So when we look at policy, we have to be thinking not only in terms of government holding a bunch of keys or a set of regulations, but more as a facilitator, how investment can be brought in, how safeguards can be protected, and how the economy can actually, or a country can go towards its potential economic and social state. Now, just to get moving on to the subject, this slide I've taken it from a World Bank document from the 2010 data, which gives the transport infrastructure quality across several Asian countries. The black vertical line there is the global average of a rank between 0 and 6. And of course, you will be looking at where Sri Lanka is. And you can see that in roads, we are average, at least in terms of the global index. In railroads, we are average. Ports, we are above average. In air transport, we are average. And electricity supply, we are average. So we are, by and large, an average in terms of many of these infrastructure. Of course, there are some that are way below us and some that are above us, and I think we can relate to most of that. So in terms of infrastructure we have, Sri Lanka has potential to grow, but we've also come a long way to justify our status now as a middle-income country, right? So how do we go from here? Many countries have found it difficult to go from here. They have fallen into what is called the middle-income trap, where infrastructure, they've built unsustainable infrastructure. They have not built the regulatory schemes, and most of the infrastructure has become ineffective with large debts to pay and so on. So our policy in terms of the social change should look towards going there, look towards reaching those milestones and also avoiding the pitfalls that some of the countries, particularly in East Asia and also in Latin America, have experienced over the last couple of decades. Now, I think the way forward, the first step the way forward is to find where government must intervene, right? Some say the less government intervention there it is, the best it is for anybody. While that may be true of bad government, it certainly should not be true of good governance. Now, government's main intervention now appears to be investment. Everybody looks for government to either bring the investment, guarantee it, or provide some kind of concessions. And that seems to be what the common belief is a starting point for development in Sri Lanka. Now, while that is no doubt necessary, we also have the question as to what is expected from that investment. Many people struggle with differentiating outputs and outcomes. Outputs are objectives, outcomes are goals. And very often we mistake the objectives for our goals. We mistake outputs for outcomes. Finally, the desired result is an outcome. If I give an example from the road sector, many people want a highway built. For example, there are many people who will say we need elevated highways in Colombo. And I know there are proposals today for elevated highways, right? That's a tangible output that people can see and people will feel is a part of development and money is being spent. But the final outcome is that mobility in and around Colombo should improve. And very often we are satisfied just to have the output and we are not questioning whether it will give the outcome that we desire. And this is one of the major problems that we've seen, at least in the highways and the transport and logistics sectors, that have led to infrastructure that has come up where the expected usage, the expected benefits have not come. So one important step in going towards a policy-led culture for development is to be very clear about outcomes of different infrastructure that we may build. Just having the infrastructure is very often useless. It may be beneficial to the engineering community because that gives you business and it gives you jobs, but beyond that, probably it may not give the desired benefit to the country. Now, just to give a few more examples so as to I make myself very clear. Now, in the field of transport, it's often a valid question to ask, what gives you better mobility? What gives you better output? Because finally, how you measure the satisfaction of travel is how quickly, how safely, at what cost you can travel at the time you want. And not necessarily whether you have an elevated expressway or whether you go on an underground or whatever. It may be a private vehicle, it could be a public vehicle. In some countries, public transport gives you a better service than private transport most of the time, right? So we need to then look at mobility. So if you make giving better mobility the outcome, then actually you may want to build better public transport in a country like Sri Lanka, where building roads actually leads to more congestion, particularly in urban areas. We also have this issue that we like new constructions, adding new infrastructure without taking too much trouble about getting the best of what we have. And on most of our roads, we build at tremendous cost, and then we don't manage them. The road agencies do not effectively enforce the road or the thoroughfares ordinance. 50–60% of the carrying capacity of the road is lost because of side friction and what happens on the other side, on the sides of the road. So something that is built at tremendous economic, social, and sometimes environmental cost, we are not actually using adequately. But we are happy to spend more money to build more roads. Then we also have the situation where you can build, let's say, an urban flyover or an elevated expressway, and we will be happy to consider the benefit to the people who use it without looking at the impact of the entire road users. And we've seen this in many countries, that people do feasibility studies just to say, okay, somebody currently needs half an hour to travel from A to B. We build an expressway and that person can go in 10 minutes. Right? But actually what happens is that when the people come down at the other end, there is more congestion and more people lose more time than even compared to the few people that save time. So these are some of the issues where we could easily become output-oriented and not outcome-oriented. Right? For example, now we have project proposals for LRT or monorail as against extensive development of the bus and railway system. Right? Now, while we do need elevated or mass transport systems, building a very vast system at tremendous cost will still lead to only about 10–15% of the province using it. Whereas developing the bus and the railway system, which can be done with much less cost, will be useful for 60–70% of the population on a daily basis. Right? So what is the outcome? Is it the outcome to build infrastructure, or is the outcome that we want that they'll be useful for the daily lives of not only individuals, but the corporate sector? Now, in terms of why we need this kind of infrastructure, most low-income countries and middle-income countries require a greater spatial connectivity infrastructure. This is identified as one of the most important in Asia in particular, to generate the benefits of what they call economies of agglomeration, being able to collect the fragmented productions that we have in our part of the world, to collect them together, to process them, and to take them to large markets both within the country and outside. And this is why transport and logistics are becoming very important, pivotal infrastructure to take us in our journey beyond here. However, the trade-off between economic efficiency that is sought by this new infrastructure and spatially balanced growth is a difficult issue, because all of these things come at some cost to society, and the benefits they give also may not be uniform to society. Right? So therefore, these policies have to be balanced very carefully. Now, in terms of balancing such policy, what are the instruments that the government has, right? So I've listed them in two categories. I was earlier referring to the implicit policies and the explicit policies. So the explicit policies are the legislative changes that are required. Now, in terms of infrastructure provision, there are 4 areas that the government can actually bring about certain control. First is access to providers, people who will provide supply. And we know that there are deficiencies in supply in many areas, and greater access has to be provided to different providers, and government cannot satisfy all of that. There may be private provision, there may be private funding for public provision, and so on. So policy has to stipulate what kind of access is provided to the suppliers of this infrastructure. They also require access to use. For example, an expressway, as we know, is not open to everybody to use. Express cannot be open for everybody to use. But nevertheless, you have to ask the question, how a government manages that kind of differentiated benefit. There can be a situation where, particularly if taxpayers' money is being used, a question where the benefit will be reached by a few people in society, but the cost of it has to be borne by people who may never get to use it. So these are equity issues that have to be looked at, and a government is expected to ensure that the benefits of regulation are spread throughout the cross-section of society. Also, policy is required for financial transparency. And we know today there is a heightened interest in how governments spend money. Because of past experiences, probably, financial transparency issues have to be very well laid out. Finally, in terms of explicit, I think the degree of regulation, how much control a government has, particularly in terms of impact on the environment, pricing, and safety issues, and so on. These cannot be relegated to investors. These cannot be relegated to users. They have to be actually one of the responsibilities of the government. So access to the suppliers, opening the doors for people to come and invest, to provide, accessing the doors for people to use, ensuring equitability, having financial transparency and control. And these are 4 areas that a government needs to work on in terms of establishing a sound policy framework for infrastructure development. There are also the more implicit policies I spoke about, which would be to ensure that these developments are not ad hoc standalone. And as Arun was saying, that is probably the path we have come, and the possible path that we could even follow unless we have a very determined effort not to do that. We need to think more of integrated development. Like many other countries, Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan administration and the bureaucracy, including engineers, we all like to work in our own compartments. We like to build our own infrastructure. We do not want to work with others. We do not want to integrate into their plans. And this costs a lot to any government and society, that we are not willing to be part of integrated strategies. And that policy, that needs to change. And those are things that can be worked through procedures, like having integrated master plans that everybody has to be part of. We have to ensure economic efficiency. It's difficult to make legislation for economic efficiency, and these have to be collective government responsibility to ensure that no public funds are spent unless there is a very good chance of recovering that and more. Ensuring equitable benefits, that the balance between people who benefit from investment and those that have to pay for it in the end are equitably shared. And also about the regulations for competitive procurement. And that is something that is extremely important in our culture, where we have a legacy of financial corruption in many projects, and we need to come out of that legacy. So just to show where all of this might end up, we are in search of higher quality of life. And in terms of the transport and logistics, for example, that comes from lower cost of living, competitive exports, and a better livable environment free of pollution and accidents and so on. That is the contribution of transport and logistics to higher quality of life. And for that, we need to have efficient infrastructure and service delivery, And that will be facilitated by the private sector and the public sector. The private sector is driven by financial profit, otherwise it will not survive. The public investment must be driven by economic benefits, otherwise the country will not survive. The role of government is to manage this, to facilitate this, and this is the change that a government can do. It needs to regulate the private sector in particular. It needs to get money from the financial profit through taxes. It may need to subsidize certain economically beneficial but not financially profitable services, and it needs to use some of that money for its own investment. So this is how it should work in theory. Now, getting on to what governments really do, it's slightly different. We know that private sector will, of course, assess its financial risk, and they will not move unless they have some kind of guarantee of return. And that's important. No private sector will be able to proceed unless it evaluates and mitigates risk. But governments tend to concentrate on political risk. And governments have to face the elections, the people every 5 years or whatever. And you can't blame a government for not working towards that. However, in Sri Lanka, you're not sure you will have 5 years. So I suppose governments are ready, have to be ready even before that to show some work for the people. At least that's the way it has in the last several years. So many areas actually between these two concentrations, many critical areas seem to get it dropped out. And economic risk assessment and even mitigation seems to be often neglected. And that is why we have a large number of public infrastructure out there that are actually not even paying for itself. Poor planning, poor design, overpricing, all of these contribute and have not been captured in an economic analysis. And we cannot go on like this. Secondly, the social risk analysis, as I've mentioned, often is rushed through and seen as an impediment to progress. And I think we need to graduate from that to understanding that all of this is done for the betterment of the people, and that no single person or a community that has to pay for it should be deprived of the due compensation. Environmental risks, much has been said about this in several fora, and we all know that we have a very fragile environment in our country, and we cannot afford to take risks that cannot be mitigated adequately. Technological risk, yes, we need to have technology that is sustainable, technology that we can ourselves own and master and drive, rather than being dependent on foreign suppliers. So these are all areas that I think, as the engineering community in particular, in mega projects and the future pipeline of projects that appear to be on the horizon need to be planned out. And as the engineering community, it's not only the projects that we must see, but also the policies that protect these projects for the betterment of the community that they intend to serve. So just to touch a few on some of the areas, financing is a critical area, and we have to ensure from where this money comes. The user charges are the best source of funding for a project, and as against taxpayers' borrowings. So if there are projects where the users can pay, and these are financially viable projects, they can take institutional credit for that, right? And where only part of that is possible, mixed approaches. So there should be a greater push towards starting projects where the user itself can pay. And going back to my earlier comparison of public transport, you developing bus services and train services, these are improvements that the users can actually pay for from the cash box. Whereas expensive mass transit systems will need substantial loans to be paid by the rest of the community, and unless they are very well studied and the risks are mitigated, they can be problems. Just skip that. So, the best financing schemes for airports, ports, buses, logistics facilities. Now, these are some of the low-hanging fruits that any government can look at in terms of channeling private sector funding through formulation of user charges. Right? And there will be many successful projects all over the world without actually looking at heavy investment, government borrowings, and so on. Finally, to look at some of the other controls that are needed in policy. Policy must both have a top-down approach from a controlling side and a bottom-up approach from a public participation side. And so I mentioned here active community participation as well as regulation, having competition. These are things that a government needs to ensure are there in infrastructure projects. Also, I was talking about integrating development. The World Bank, in one of its reports, argued that there are pockets of excellence in some low-income countries and middle-income countries where they have been able to integrate development, and institutions are not just continuing to build more and more infrastructure for themselves, that the geographic economies are actually being tapped through higher densities, and cities are becoming more efficient, where travel times are becoming shorter, not longer, and people's quality of life is improving. So with the new Western megapolis and the emphasis on a new generation of urban living, I think we have opportunities now to actually go for policies of integrated development. Also, it's often underestimated the role of the public sector. When private investment is brought, it is often said and re-said that the public sector has to be stronger in terms of planning, regulating, monitoring what is going on in private sector development. Many countries struggle to have the adequate capacity for doing this, especially when there is an intended explosion of private investment. The capacity development of public sector is also important. So finally, my key policy changes for a new culture. This is from a JICA report in 2012. So to bring about a policy change for a new culture, the way in which projects are selected and designed, they talk about modesty and realism in planning, which is often a temptation for developing countries to attempt to do more than what a country at a particular stage is capable of. Comprehensive feasibility studies, which often takes time, for which many governments do not have. Value for money analysis, as I mentioned, appropriate risk sharing, and adequate return for lenders and sponsors. So a new culture in policy would actually pay attention to these things rather than rushing through some of these things. Procurement and contract monitoring, open and competitive procurement, all of these finally would actually add to better policy support. I also talked about the legal and institutional framework. So in conclusion, for a policy-led development culture, we must move from output-based project planning to outcome-based project planning. We need to be able to have a proper and a regular amendment of explicit regulations. Right now, that doesn't seem to be happening. We need to have planning-based project implementations, particularly integrated development planning, such as is now possible under the megapolis projects. We need to improve the regulatory controls. We need to improve community participation and ownership. We need to improve the procurement processes, and we need to expedite projects that are financeable on user charges. As a middle-income country, I think more and more projects can be funded wholly or partly through user charges, and that those should be prioritized. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Amal Kumarage, and we certainly appreciate those points that were highlighted and also the distinction that was spelt out between outcome and output. They're not the same. Thank you, and we would like to invite Engineer Professor Niranjani Ratnayaka one more time to please be on stage to hand over a token of appreciation to our speaker. Thank you. So Professor Kumarage was wondering whether the plaque in his hand is an outcome or an output. So he has already, meaning our previous speaker, touched on the matter of megapolis, and in as much as this is a topic that has been discussed avidly and dealt with in the media and so on and so forth, I am of the opinion that people are still not very clear as to what it all entails. In fact, even the term seems very strange to most. So here we have an opportunity to hear much more and hopefully have your questions directed to in the appropriate time for it. The Honourable Minister in charge of this particular topic or subject, namely megapolis and Western development. So I hardly need to introduce the Honourable Minister Patali Champika Ranawaka. Most of you know who he is and what he is about and what he has done. Perhaps also we can use this moment to underscore the fact that he is himself a member of this institution of engineers, having been an alumnus of the University of Moratuwa, where he qualified and obtained his degree in electrical engineering, specializing in the area of power systems. So let's, without further ado, invite the Honourable Minister to address this audience on this topic.
President, Institution of Engineers, Sri Lanka, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I am certainly pleased to be here this afternoon among us you at this third National Engineering Conference organized by the Institution of Engineers, Sri Lanka. The invitation that I receive quite regularly for professional dialogues such as today's conference organized by various professional circles in the country do continue to enjoy reasonable high chances of finding a time slot in my diary despite an often congested schedule. Even then, I must say that forums such as these organized by the engineering fraternity of this country do always instill within me that extra level of enthusiasm. And this is not merely because of my sense of belonging to the professional fraternity of engineers that I happen to belong through my early academic and professional training, but rather because of the pivotal role that I always believe the engineering fraternity of this country is called upon to play in our march towards greater heights of national development. In an exhaustively diverse spectrum of developmental activity, be it in the economic, social, or the environmental spheres, it is the engineers who are primarily entrusted to play the role of building new infrastructure, introducing new technology, optimal maintenance of existing infrastructure and services, and above all, bring in innovation across all these fields. Turning to the subject of participation of engineers in the national policy process, I am indeed glad to see the increase in sensitivity and of course the increase in intensity with which that the IESL, as the apex national body of engineering of this country, has been treating this matter over the past years. Today's dialogue, which happens in the form of a conference dedicated to the subject, I am sure marks culmination of IESL's long-standing efforts in this direction. I wish to congratulate IESL as the apex national body for promotion, development, and regulation of the professional practice of engineering as well as engineering education in Sri Lanka for this very important and timely initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, there can be no debate at all about the cruciality of the role that the engineering fraternity of the country should in fact be playing in national policies in a broad, extensive range of fields. While there is no doubt whatsoever about the extent of involvement engineers in implementation of national programs and projects, the question, however, remains whether there is adequate participation of engineers in formulation of these national policies. After all, it is those policies that act as underlying foundation of the very programs and projects that the engineers are called upon to implement. The perceived answer obviously appears to be no, not adequate, and of course, hence this conference. The common understanding is that there is an acute dearth of expertise on engineering, technology, and technology management in the specialized state institution responsible for such a vital role as the nation's finance, planning, and even monitoring and auditing. The same holds true with regard to the senior most layer of the public sector that get involved in national policy matters. I believe one of the outcomes of a conference of this nature should be put this ground reality in perspective. Get the facts and figures, do a comparative analysis, draw examples of success stories from other countries. In China, the fast-growing economy here in Asia, for example, if you look at the past couple of decades, senior-most position of the government, I mean the standing Politburo there in the Communist Party, from president to the ministers, held by engineers. So much so that on one occasion in the recent past, 8 out of 9 most influential positions in Chinese hierarchy were held by engineers or scientists, including the president. There are similar examples in many other better performing Asian countries, such as Malaysia, Singapore, and Korea. So make the general proposition currently in discussion here in this room today into a clear, rational, and logical case backed by relevant facts and figures that nobody can challenge. In the meantime, let us very clear on other pretty much relevant fact. When we say engineers could certainly excel in policy formulation as well as in top-level administrative positions in the public sector, we should also remember that there are additional competences that they must acquire for this to happen. Engineers should not be naive to believe that the engineering education, training, and experience alone would qualify them to become successful as policymakers or top administrators. Of course, professional education, training, as well as comprehensive experience in management, policy, etc., as well as the relevant multidisciplinary exposure are essential prerequisites. Nonetheless, the prerequisites that can be acquired with no major difficulty given the right working environment and facilitation. This is certainly an area that IESL can well expand their efforts. Nevertheless, let me assure that I share this proposition just as much as you do and would be glad to deliver whatever I could possibly do in my capacity towards the transformation that is envisaged by the present efforts. Now, let me get into the next part of my presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, My invitation also carried a request to speak on megapolis, and let me oblige. What is Western megapolis? It is simply a grand plan to develop the entire western region of the country, which is centered around the capital city of Colombo, covering approximately 4,000 square kilometers as a single megapolis. Well, from a visionary or a strategic perspective, Western megapolis is Sri Lanka's grand strategy to propel the country's drive to achieve status of a high-income developed nation by 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, for many centuries, before the 19th century, the balance in global geopolitical as well as economic power was decided by the Indian Ocean region. It was only in the 19th and 20th century that it is shifted to Atlantic and Pacific Ocean regions. Today, the world stage is once again well set for re-emergence of the Indian Ocean region as the global economic powerhouse and also as a vital geopolitical theater of action. And Sri Lanka is right in the middle of the region, just miles away from the east-west sea route, which had been one of the world's busiest for our last 2 millennia, and the aviation route. And this aptly describes the potential for a megapolis in South Asia, located in Sri Lanka between Singapore and Dubai. That is just one dimension of the proposed megapolis. Secondly, the Western megapolis will also be the grand strategy to eliminate the congestion pressures on urban physical infrastructure, on transport, housing, urban services and amenities, and the environment usually brought about by messy urbanization. Thirdly, it is also the grand strategy for optimally harnessing the potentialities for economic growth which are created by the current global techno-economic environment as exemplified by the advent of a new industrial revolution and the emergence of smart planet. The implementation of the grand strategy, Western megapolis, will involve two fundamental transformations. The first is the much needed structural transformation of the Sri Lanka's economy. Move forward manufacturing and move toward tradable services involving high tech. The other transformation which need to be effected in parallel, going hand in hand, in order to drive the above structural transformation is the spatial transformation of the Western region. That spatial transformation will drive the nation's grand strategy for overall development in 3 ways. Firstly, it will enable the national economy to leverage the benefits of economies of agglomeration brought about by urbanization. Secondly, it will eliminate the congestion pressures in urban infrastructure, urban services, and environment brought about by messy urbanization. And thirdly, it will certainly reduce per unit capital cost of infrastructure provisioning. Ladies and gentlemen, our guiding philosophy on development is a holistic and inclusive one and is based on 4 fundamental pillars, namely the economic growth and prosperity. Then the most important fact, the social equity. And in long term, the environmental sustainability. And finally, the happiness of individuals. We have carefully formulated our specific objectives. And also we have identified 10 strategic interventions. And here goes the list. First, the transport, energy and water, housing and relocation of administration. We are now planning to relocate all the government buildings, including President House and the office here in Sri Jayawardhanapura. And environment and waste management, flood control, and also the waste management of the cities. The Aero Maritime Trade Hub, along this Katunayaka International Airport area, we are going to put up a new city called AeroCity, and the new maritime city from Jayala to Vattala, and also the trade hub there alongside this Bere Lake. And the high-rise central business district, CBD, industrial and tourist cities, Mirigama and Horana will be developed as industrial cities, whereas Nigambu and Aludgama will be developed as tourist cities. The techno city, the most important city to propel this country into a high-income levels, using this new strategy called innovation-driven economy or a knowledge-based economy. The science and technology there in Malambe to Homagama area. The eco-habitat there in Matugama area, and the plantation city there in Avisavale. The smart nation, the smart city infrastructure project is an all-pervading project, and the tranquility, the spiritual development and facilitation. This grouping had mainly functional and partly geographic and also non-exhaustive. The first three are major infrastructure development interventions. The others represent different thematic projects and their combinations. Let us look at some of the key projects envisaged, which I believe could be the most exciting part of many of you. This is development of Colombo downtown as a central business district. This involves developing an area around the Bere Lake. And the second one, the Colombo Port core area of historic architecture together with the pedestrian web. This is Colombo core development project at this international financial city adjacent to the port area. This is the new project envisaged by Megapolis to develop the earlier, what we call this port city, into an international financial city and an international investment location here in the Indian Ocean. And also to develop the coastal belt from Jayala to Vattala to facilitate the maritime business. And also the science and technology corridor. Here is the previous one. Yeah. Here you can see the new harbor that is developing, and from the north of the new harbor you can have another two ports. We called it North Port Part A and Part B. The blue area is the new financial city there in the Colombo Port. The next one, the science and technology corridor, the zone of advanced high-tech activity. We have identified lands there in Malambe and also there in Homagama to put up new type of zone. We called it Tech City. We are going to promote nanotechnology, gene technology, food technology, maybe the space technology, and also the civil nuclear applications, and also to develop knowledge-based processing things, KPOs, BPOs, and especially IT sector there in the advanced high-tech activity there in the Malambe Homagama corridor. And also we are going to put up new universities, new technology institutions, and also the city called professional city there in the Homagama Malambe area alongside the expressway there in the outer periphery expressway. And also two dedicated industrial townships at Mirigama and Horana. We located this thing there in Mirigama because of the central highway, and also we located this Horana thing because of the Ruwanpura highway, and we are going to have a kind of network of expressways, railways, and also connectivity with this industrial township with the port and airport. And also developing airport as an aerocity and adjoining existing airport. And the logistic corridor in between port and airport. There will be a kind of expressway, elevated way from New Kalani Bridge to port, connecting the port and the main transport hub there in the Peta and the airport there in Katunayaka. And also the plantation of city and eco-habitat. we identified Avisavale area as a plantation city to promote the plantation businesses and also a hiko habitat there in Mathugama area adjacent to the Singaraja forest. And also to improve the network of small townships. Under the Sukitapura program, we are now developing 23 new townships along these main zones of development and also to facilitate these zones of development. And also here comes the transport. I think Professor Amal Kumarage explained a bit about these things and constitute prime strategic intervention requiring a series of both short-term and long-term measures. This includes bus modernization and also as once IESL proposed the railway electrification and modernization. Now we are going to implement that project and also the rapid transit systems, inland water transport systems and also multimodal transport hubs. We are going to develop the PETA area, especially the PETA railway station and adjoining lands as a main multimodal transport hub, facilitated by another 4 transport hubs, one there in Kottawa, one there in Panadura, one there in Kadawatha, and one there in 18-mile post Katunayaka. And bit of elevated expressways to connect this administrative city with the other part of the megapolis like port, airport, and techno city. Here is the full list about all these things. So these are the project list. We have identified different over 140 projects and we are now doing the marketing part as well. We have organized various entrepreneur, developer and also investor forums. They are in Germany, they are in Seoul, they are in Japan, they are in China and various parts of the world to facilitate this project list. It's a long-term thing. For 15 years, we are now trying to implement this thing in a pace-by-pace way. Then this Western megapolis is Sri Lanka's dream project and indeed the cornerstone of the country's mega development drive. In parallel to this, we are going to develop Kandy as a strategic city, as a partner city, and also to develop Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa, Trincomalee triangle as a new economic zone. It's a cultural triangle before. Now we are going to transform into this cultural triangle into a one big economic triangle. And a new development there in Hambantota, and also the goal will be developed as a new strategic city as well. I'm sure that the engineering fraternity will continue to play the pivotal role that they are called upon to play in transforming our nation's dream into this challenging yet realistic and achievable reality that lays a few years of commitment and hard work ahead. I thank you.
And we thank you too, Honourable Minister, Partly Champika Ranawaka. We would like to invite the President of IESL, Engineer Vimalsena Gamage, to please hand over to our Speaker and the Honourable Minister a token of appreciation. Thank you very much. So now, having taken in all of that which is involved and at very quick pace with regard to megapolis development, we now have this topic of economic development strategies, which involves that much more. And of course, our next speaker is also a chartered engineer, a fellow of IESL, and managing director for the Agency for Development Strategy under the Ministry of Development Strategies and International Trade. So you can see the expanded area where Engineer Mangala Yapa is now involved. Of course, he's no stranger to many of you, and he's of course been very well associated with shipbuilding and all of the wonderful things that he was able to accomplish during his time with that area. And let's not waste any more time, but invite Mangala to take the stage now and take us through his presentation, which adds this additional feature of economics.
President, IESL, Honorable Minister, past presidents, distinguished invitees, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a privilege and an honor to take part in this National Engineering Conference. And first of all, my sincere thanks to the organizers for inviting me to make this presentation. Having gone through the program, I'm actually very happy to see that the theme now focuses on national policies, which I think Professor Kumarage went into very much detail in articulating what policies are and how policies can help transform economic and other activities in the country. Before I go into my presentation, I need to make few clarifications and corrections. The introduction in the program contains certain information which is not necessarily updated. Unfortunately, not due to any fault of the organizers and IESL. It's my own fault because I was requested to update my information. As usually, we are a little late on some of these areas. And by the time it was printed, my updated message has been reached later. I'm no longer the president of the National Chamber of Exporters or any other chambers. My current job is purely on the proposed agency for development attached to the Ministry of Development Strategies and International Trade. And I'm also yet the managing director designate for the agency for development because the agency still is not enacted. Having made those clarifications, let me move down on my presentation. Economic development and economic activities are very complex issues. If you look at Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan economy, we have a GDP about 82 billion plus US dollars. But one salient aspect that we can see is there's big variance in economic activities. If you look at the Western province, which the Honorable Minister mentioned, which will transform into the Western megapolis, maybe with slightly extended area, contributes about 42% of Sri Lanka's GDP. While the North, which is after now about 6-7 years after the war, only contributes about 3.5%. This is as far as 2015 available data is concerned. And Uva province, where I come from, again contributes only about 5% to the GDP. So you can see this huge variance also has major impacts on the social well-being of the people. Policies on economic development may be top-down from the government, policymakers, the parliament, etc. But the economic activities are by the people, and the benefits are also derived by the people. If you look at our economy, about 13% is agriculture. When we are going to school, so our school days, we learned that Sri Lanka is very much an agrarian country. It's gradually transformed. About 29% is industry, and the predominant area is the services sector. 58% as of now. And when we look at our total population of around 21 million people, the labor force is about 8.3 million, and a substantial number of labor force, about 33%, is still occupied in agriculture. So that affects distribution of economic benefits. The contribution to the GDP is around 13%, but large number of people are occupied in that segment. Industry, somewhat parallel, 0.3%, and a contribution of 29%, and the services sector, again, 41%. And although it is not mentioned here, if you look at the private sector corporates in Sri Lanka, more than 95% is in the informal sector, employing less than 5 or around 5 employees. We have an unemployment rate around 4%, which is commendable, but I am sure there is a substantial underemployment that is not captured in these statistics. We have an export value somewhere around 18 billion US dollars. This is around 2016 estimate. Of course, this figure may vary because some of the services sectors are not accounted in the national listing. And the main exports are 26% to the United States, United Kingdom about 9%, India about 7.2%, Germany about 4.3%. So very limited markets that we have access to. And primarily our exports are textiles, apparels, tea and spices. But we have an import volume of about 30 to 35 billion rupees, primarily depending on the price of oil. Main import goods, petroleum, machinery, foodstuff as well. Now that gives you I would say, an overview of the Sri Lankan economy. Engineers are good at crunching numbers and understanding the numbers. But I think it is necessary to keep this in mind when we are looking at our economy, economic transformation and economic rebalancing. As the Honorable Minister said, the economic activity, particularly when Sri Lanka was resplendent during the 5th to 11th century, it was very much connected with the global integration through a maritime hub. And I come from that area, so therefore I have somewhat inclination towards that and always try to build my argument around it. Yes, Sri Lanka is bestowed with many ports and harbors. This is an olden port map that I have taken. There are many that helped us to be integrating with the world. So ports such as Mantai, Uruvela, Salawatota, Gokanathitha, and many others are appearing in many historical chronicles, and Ceylon is synonymous with maritime trade and harbors. It is so much so today. What you see today on the far right corner is the density of traffic, seaborne traffic globally, and the lighter lines, the yellowish lines, are the highest density which is going around Sri Lanka. So we have a natural advantage to become a maritime hub. And many believe that we can build our economic development strategy based on this kind of a natural advantage. You must have something upon which you can build your economic development strategy. So many believe that this is a possibility and that we should go on that line. Yes, why not? This is not today. This is the history. Even if you look at as far as 1803, I'm not taking you to 5th to 11th century. Yes, at that time too we were deeply integrated with the global trades. Ships from the West came to the western ports of Salavathota, Mantei, and then went across using the inland water streams, waterways that were available, came to the western side, then moved to the other side of the Bay of Bengal. And that was part of the Silk Route. But if you look at as early as 1910, the port of Colombo, which the British built, ranked the 7th in the global ports, handling a tonnage of over 8 million tons of ships that entered. We were just below New York, London, Antwerp, Hamburg, Hong Kong. Ports like Liverpool, Marseilles, Singapore were way below us. You can see the picture shows people dealing with cargo. Ports are controversial subject for discussion these days. Ports to operate need cargo. There's nothing else you can do in the port, nothing much. You can do some things, but you need cargo. It could be import cargo, it could be export cargo. So what made Sri Lanka a primary port, a top-end port in the British reign? It's the cargo that Sri Lanka could produce, the commodities, the tea, rubber, and coconut. In the 5th to 11th century, it was the grain that we had in surplus, and the scarcity of that commodity elsewhere. That's why we exported rice and other grains from Sri Lanka to other countries, the pearls, the spices, the elephants, so on and so forth. In the 19th century, it was commodities. But post-independence, we have gone through many economic shifts. I have just listed out certain industrial policies that has been implemented, and I'm sure you can count many more such initiatives. By the irony is, by now, we are very much net import country. Around 30 to 35 billion dollar imports and below 20 billion exports. So always there's a gap of about $15 billion that we need to find somewhere. Thankfully, part of our labor force is in foreign countries, earn foreign exchange, and then remit it to Sri Lanka. That bridge part of the gap. The rest comes from various other FDI and other loans, etc. Sri Lanka has now moved to the middle income level. No longer concessional loans are available for Sri Lanka. So if Sri Lanka is looking at economic development and development strategies to boost economy, you need to take all of these aspects into account. Again, I go back to my maritime map. So we had to put Sri Lanka in the context of the world. Economic activities produce goods and services which are being used by people. They have to be consumed. In a small market like ours, and a small economy like ours, consumption is limited. So it needs to move out, as in the 19th century. So our natural advantage in the global maritime activities is a very good starting point. But the issue is, will that be enough? Can we build purely on that? certainly not so. Yes, we are centrally located, as the Honorable Minister said. Many sea lanes crisscross around Sri Lanka. We are very close to the main sea route, and there are about 400, close to about 400 or 400 plus ships passing just 10 nautical miles away from Hambantota. All that is true. But that alone is not enough. We're very central to the markets, growing markets around us. But do we have access to them? Are we competitive enough to export to them? That's a challenge. Today, there's a huge talk about the 21st century maritime Silk Route, replicating what happened hundreds of years back. Because yet, even today, the Indian Ocean is the hub of maritime transportation and economic activities. So Sri Lanka is located at a very pivotal point in the 21st century maritime Silk Road, where China is adopting this one belt, one road policy. Our ports are deep, so they can accommodate even the latest very large or ultra-large container vessels. That's a plus point. The ports that were there during the British time, which could accommodate average vessels, are no longer suitable to engage in this trade. As Professor Kumaraga said, the world ranking, or rather world assessment of port sector in Sri Lanka is above average, which is a positive thing. So we have done better than other areas in that. Investment has gone into that. I believe our size of our population and the land mass is also decent enough to build a good maritime-based economy in that. And we have a very good human capital. We are an outlier in the South Asian region when it comes to Human Development Index and many other achievements. All those are plus points. Relatively, we have political stability too. Of course, this is questionable. I have marked a question mark there, how you look at it. But I think we are stable. Even some developed countries change their political leadership almost every year. But we have lots of negatives also. We don't have enough capital. You saw the huge list of development projects in the Western region megapolis. And where will this capital come from? Will we have the know-how? Perhaps the technology can be transferred. But is transferred technology is good enough? Would we not need something more than technology? Knowing how to do things. When you look at the colossal amount of mistakes that has happened, I personally believe that that's a deficiency in Sri Lanka. We are very much inward-looking in our attitudes. Even educated people tend to think very inward. Already it was mentioned, we may be falling into the middle income trap. We don't have any more cheap labor. Labor is scarce. Nor can we compete with the developed economies with high-tech products, value-added products. So we are somewhere in between. So much was spoken about policies. I'm so happy to see that the policy sphere comes very dominantly in today's conference. Even the theme is national policies, voice of engineers. Are they consistent and coherent? I agree with Professor Kumarage. Policies is not something that is developed and kept for ages, but the direction has to be consistent. They must be coherent with the national development strategy that is going forward. I believe that a country like Sri Lanka has to build this policy on export orientation when it comes to economic development, because what we produce has to be consumed, perhaps consumed by a larger base of consumers elsewhere who can afford. And as I said, 95% of Sri Lanka's private sector is small and medium enterprises, less than 5 people, informal sector. A very big focus has to be on the SMEs. We call it today MSMEs, micro, small and medium enterprises. Our policies should enable doing business. This is very much necessary. Again, without that kind of policies, the much awaited or much needed private sector investment will not come in. It has to be foreign direct investment enabling, because without which we can't meet the capital gap. So while we are having certain advantages, naturally, given by our location in the Indian Ocean, being central to certain fast developing markets, having lots of positives compared to our neighbors, we must not forget that we have certain challenges, very big challenges and negatives that we need to overcome as well. So that's another aspect that I would like to underscore. Now let's move a little bit away from Sri Lanka and look at the region in context, particularly Asia. So I'm trying to build some argument and a thought and maybe leave that with you rather than telling you where we need to go. Because conferences are there to engage in a dialogue. Until about 1800, Asia contributed close to 50% of world's economic output. What is today? Asia's share in world economic output shrank to 10% post-industrial revolution, making the West the leader in spite of post-war Japanese success. World economy has grown. People are altogether maybe doing better, but our share in that has grown down. That's reality. We believe that the balance is swinging back in our favor. By 2001, Asia started contributing 22%, thanks to Japan, South Korea, and maybe the transformation in India and China. Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia all coming together. By 2010, it has grown to 30%. And we believe in another 5 years, that is 2020, it will go up to about 35%. So the pendulum is somewhat swinging back. So there we see a light, a silver line, that things can be better for Asia. It is predicted that by 2020, 6 Asian economies would appear in the top 10. That's China, undoubtedly, most likely the number 1. Japan, India, South Korea, Singapore and Hong Kong, also part of China. Of course, these are forecasts. The world trade in 2020 is forecast to be $86 trillion. To bring you into perspective, in 2001 it was 16 trillion. In 2010 it was 38 trillion. And 10 years down the line we are looking a world trade of about 86 trillion, which is more than double that of 2010. Yet, this is also ground reality. When I first came across this quotation, I actually didn't know who Mr. Razin Sali was. Now he is the chairman of IPS. He is a Sri Lankan, teaching in National University of Singapore. And it really opened my eyes. He said in the Policy Option for Africa conference, in not far away, 10 years back, 13th, 14th November 2006, he said, Sri Lanka is one of the spectacular third world failures, a tragedy of epic proportions. The roots and symptoms of failure predate the explosion of violent ethnic conflict in 1983. They reach back at least to the 1950s. Ceylon was in many ways Britain's model colony, well prepared for independence and starting the post-colonial era with high hopes and great promise. But where are we now? So Asia has a great opportunity before them. We have certain advantages and positives. Yes, there are some challenges and negatives that we have to overcome, but our past performance does not necessarily prove that we are able to reap the benefits of this opportunity if we continue what we are doing. What are the critical concerns? If you are looking at export-oriented economic development, do we have a large basket of goods to export? Are we still going to depend on commodity trading? There was no tea in Sri Lanka, not in export volumes. It came from China. I come from that area, the Ua region. If you look at the unprecedented transformation it has done to the landscape and to the entire economy of the Ua area, to the lives of the people, I'm sure 120, 30 years back, it was a big sea change that took place. So are the coconut and rubber estates. So even they had to create that trading commodity to be exported. Naturally, people resisted. It was a huge change. Ports were built. Infrastructure was created. Railroads were built. Electrification came. So many things happened with these activities. And today we have very limited basket of goods. I know there is a huge debate about free trade agreements not serving the purpose of the country. I agree to some extent. Not necessarily because the agreements are bad, we also don't have goods to export. See our economy, my second or third slide, only 30% is our industries. I'm not trying to put blame to anyone, but that's the reality. I know there are some young engineers from my former company here. they will witness how difficult it was to take a large pool of people to start building ships in Sri Lanka. Because we felt there is an opportunity. We felt it's possible. We felt it can be done. But try to run it commercially. But we were successful. Services, the largest segment, 42%. Tourism, maybe doing somewhat okay. But can we compete with Thailand? I'm sure there are quite a number of people here who have taken a holiday, maybe in Bangkok or some other close by neighbors for very cheap prices. How is our financial sector doing? These are services. How is our logistics doing? Yes, better than India. Better than some of the South Asian ports. But your competition is not only with South Asia. You have to compete globally today. How are we faring with Singapore, Hong Kong, some ports in China? I just come down with the minister from Shenzhen. There are 2 ports in Shenzhen. Both together, their throughput is 24 million TEUs. Sri Lanka's total capacity is around 5.2 million TEU with all the private sector and public sector ports put together. That's only one special economic zone in China. We visited a port in Yangtze River, Chongqing, which is now better doing. It is in the river, it is inside the country. It's not open to any ocean. But they do more than 5 million TEUs. And the river draft is 5 meters. Whereas we accommodate 17-meter vessels in our newly built terminals. Amazing to see what's happening around the world. Product and market diversification. I spoke about product diversification. How about market diversification? I showed you where our markets are. US, European Union, little bit of India, only 7%, and some other countries. Competitiveness. Are we productive as a nation, as a country? Our transaction cost, our holidays. One of my biggest challenges in DocCAD was to get people to come to work by 7:30. Average, an individual spends about 2 hours to 3 hours getting to work. So if you are looking at 6 hours productive work, that's our norm, DocCAD. But you have to add 8 plus 3 to 4, 12 hours. So you have 50% more unproductive time that is coming. How can you improve productivity? There's globalization happening. And there is what calls the global value chains that is coming. Then, of course, sustainability and maintaining sustainable growth. Today, we are talking about the 4th industrial revolution, future of production system, emerging competencies, enabling environment. All these areas are emerging concepts that we need to deal with. So let me leave some thoughts. Now, we learned a lot about the Western megapolis, which is roughly about 40+% of our GDP and the plans for it. There's a dedicated minister, dynamic, very articulative, very forward-looking approach. Can we replicate this elsewhere? Can we look at economic development areas in the rest of the country? I'm just putting some ideas. Amal spoke about integrated approach and with national focus, which means there has to be national policies on how we are moving on these directions. But based on the development dynamics of each of these identified areas, we've been working a little bit on Hambantota because we need to somehow or other get out of those problems that we have got ourselves into. We have a port, we have an airport, we have a certain road network that is going there, expressways and the railway, but we don't have goods or passengers, and therefore ships. How do we create that? If you take that area, Golmatara, Hambantota, Monaragala, Ratnapura, together, you have about 4 million people who can be connected into that area. That may be one way of looking at it. Then you have the eastern part, again connected with the port. You have the north central part. So this is my final slide. While looking Sri Lanka in a different context, I go back to my maritime slide again. Now don't look at Sri Lanka in isolation in this maritime map. Look at Sri Lanka in integration with the markets and other emerging economies around us. Of course, I'm getting into a controversial area because 3 free trade agreements are simultaneously being discussed. And one idea behind that is deeper integration with these economies: India, China, Singapore. Of course, GSP Plus and that integration with the European Union. And then east coast of Africa, Central Asia, Pakistan. If you put Sri Lanka in context with these economies, and you can find the right kind of strategy direction, how we can develop our economic development strategy to integrate with these economies and create a bigger consumer base, bigger market, and do cross-border trading, both investment as well as manufacturing value addition, and then cross-supply, I think Sri Lanka has a future. Of course, this is not a conclusive idea. This idea that we need to debate, discuss, and take forward. Again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I leave these thoughts with you. Perhaps we need to engage in a broader, deeper dialogue going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mangala. I'd like very much to invite to the stage now, while Mangala is still here, Engineer Jaivilal Meegoda, President-elect of ESL, to hand over that token of appreciation. We'll be making the arrangement here now for our panel discussion, which will include Professor Kumarage as well as Mangala. But before that, and while the arrangement is being made, we'd like to invite your attention on screen because we have a couple of presentations.
There's never a dull moment on Sundays for families who spend time with the Sunday Times, Sri Lanka's favorite English family weekly. With unbiased news, expert financial reviews, top-flight career openings, and informative entertaining features for all ages. Reserve your Sundays for the Sunday Times.
So we're ready for the panel discussion, but we noticed that there's a serious depletion of numbers in the audience. It would appear that the voice of engineers is going to be muted somewhat. But nevertheless, we'd like to invite our panelists to take their places. So we will be having the company of our two presenters previous, namely Professor Kumarage and Mangala Yapa. So our moderator on this occasion is certainly no stranger to this community. He, being a past president of the Institution of Engineers and a senior professor in civil engineering and having served the community in various ways in different capacities, is currently the Vice Chancellor of the University of Moratuwa, Engineer Professor Ananda Jayawardena. So we'll hand over the session to him, and your involvement hopefully will continue as we had in the morning session.
Thank you, Arun. Because Minister is not here, may I invite the project director and the team leader of the Western Region Megapolis Planning Project, Mr. Laxman Jayasekara, also to occupy your seat here, please. Thank you. Let me, first of all, extend my appreciation to the ISL for giving this opportunity to me to chair this very important panel discussion. And we had three excellent speakers talking about various aspects of their own expertise area. So we started with Professor Amal Kumarage, very eloquently explaining the policy-led development, taking transport sector as an example. And then we had the minister talking about the megapolis development, a succinct explanation of what is coming up, and he emphasized that it is the dream project of the nation, and also economic development strategies by engineer Mangala Yapa, also explaining in his own ways, emphasizing the strategies that we need to adopt, the opportunities that we lost, and so on and so forth. I wish the minister was here, but of course there is no gap because we have a team leader here, Mr. Jayasekara, who perhaps can explain things in greater detail. Let me just briefly tell the structure perhaps that we will adopt. We have about roughly 1 hour. And so I will ask some questions first from the panelists, and then we will get the questions from the audience. And briefly, of course, one important thing that struck me when Minister spoke, he said that we need to look at the problems in a holistic sense. And he emphasized that we look at sometimes the problems only in the academic angle. I mean, that perhaps aiming the universities as professors and educators. And also sometimes as engineers, we look at from our own compartments, having our ideas and trying to promote our things. And politicians, of course, look at problems only considered in the political aspects or political risks, as it was mentioned. But what is important for us is in order to move in this direction, that we need to have an idea of all these aspects. A people who actually can see the problems in all angles, a holistic way, through the education, through the practice, through our profession, in political angles, and I think we will be able to do that. And in that context, we really appreciate the minister's position, because as a good professional engineer, one of us from the institution, and also from the politics, a very seasoned politician, a very senior minister, looking in all the angles and coming and telling is a very good example that we need to understand that when we talk, when we discuss problems, when we give solutions, that we address these aspects in a holistic sense so that I think we can come out with realistic solutions. Now in this audience, we have all experts who have the expertise in all the aspects that we talked about. And I'm sure that we have the transport experts here, and we have the economic development aspects, the decision makers, and your own sense, leaders of your own business entities as well, and people who are familiar with the megapolis projects and who take a part of that. We also appreciate the presence of Engineer Upali Delpachitra here as well as a consultant. He also will be able to contribute in the discussion. And with that, my first question, in fact, I wanted to ask from the minister when, if he was here, but this can go to Mr. Jayasekara and Professor Amal Kumarage as well. Now, Professor Amal Kumarage initially mentioned that the difference between the output and outcome. And he very clearly said that sometimes we come out in the projects considering the output without really looking at outcome. And in the minister's speech, he indicated the Megapolis project as a dream project and explained all the aspects in the housing, in the energy, in the sustainable growth, in a business hub, trading hub, all these aspects. Now this certainly needs enormous amount of investment. So therefore, at a glance, all engineers here, because we are thinkers again, immediately we will have the question, okay, there is a huge output here. Now, what is the outcome? Now, I just would like to ask from Mr. Jayasekara whether in that context you have really looked at the outcome, and how do you explain, how do you justify this kind of an investment so that we can really align all our engineers to contribute for this kind of a mega project?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much for accepting me breaking into your conference. About 10 minutes ago, the Honorable Minister called me and said I had to go and stand here. I didn't know what I was coming into, but then I find myself in the podium without knowing what the Minister, Honorable Minister said to you. So it's a very, very strange situation for me, but then coming with input-output theory, which Professor Amal Kumarage, my good friend, would have elaborated. The way I understood the question, correct me if I'm wrong, the investment quantum that is required for the Western region is estimated to be in the range of $40 to $50 billion, this is in billions, and it has to occur during next 10 to 15 years, which is a relatively short term from a national point of view. If you look at the other countries in the region like Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, which is going out, of course, India. So how do we, a country which has about $75 billion GDP, generate this kind of investment? So we calculated the project volumes and the policy volumes and the expectation of the general public and the politicians. And we felt that most part of the investment has to come in from the private sector initiatives generated and supported by the international FDIs, foreign direct investment, to a great extent. So when we structured the master plan, together with, incidentally, with some of your members were participant in our team, we had about 250 to 300 professionals drawn from different parts of the country's professional spectrum. And when they formulated the plan and then get into the projects level, they always targeted some of these projects, or most of these projects are appealing to the private sector investment ideas. So that is the way, that is the only way that we can go forward. But this does not discount the contribution by the government and the government-to-government contribution from various arrangements between the countries. And I would presume at least 10% or 15% of the total volume of the investment has to come from these institutional funding like World Bank, ADB, and also the government-to-government arrangement between the countries. However, the Sri Lanka has come to a point where we cannot go on drawing the loans over and over and again. And that is understood very well. And therefore, we have to harness the private sector interest. Now, I may point out, during last few months, we are trying to push through few of the large projects which are very much of the interest of the private sector. To name few, the water-based transport system using the canals, rivers and the ocean, which is going to come out very soon. And secondly, Intermode Transport Center, which was conceived by a team of professionals in the way back when Professor Amal Kumar Ge and the team was working with the JICA and before and after, that we have enhanced that into a higher and a bigger size. And likewise, elevated roads for the first time going to come up with our comrades in the RDA as a private sector initiative for the first time. All this time, the elevated roads and the expressways were the government-to-government initiative. And so we are trying now new system of participation by the public sector and the private sector, and get the private sector, the professionals to lead this, both locally and the foreign investment. I believe Sri Lanka has a tremendous opportunity of attracting this foreign investment. So I don't know whether I understood your question rightly, but without 90 to 85% of the investment coming from these private sector sources, megapolis will not work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think probably I was unfair to direct that question immediately, perhaps because you were not here when Professor Amal Kumar Ge spoke. The idea that I wanted to find out is basically you talked about the investment, that the way that you want to really finance. And so that investment together with the well-built infrastructure will be seen as an output. And according to the explanation given by Professor Kumar Ge, the benefit that will go to the nation in terms of the raising the standard of living of people, in terms of the economic development of the country, the region, the contribution, whether there is any estimate, any study that is carried out to push this project to the people, that is a kind of a question that I want to really emphasize a little bit on that.
I'm very happy that you asked the questions. I think the megapolis, the whole concept at the beginning was for the outside world, it's a few mega projects, but actually it is not so. Our main base, the base of the economy that we are going to lay in the megapolis is the SME sector, small and medium industries, entrepreneurship, and the entrepreneurship and the professionalism that the IT sector can bring about into this economy. Currently, the SME sector contributes to about 30%, 35% of the employment and the economic structure. But when it comes to the Western region, we have about 400,000 small industries, small SME sector projects that can really take this forward. We looked at what happened in Philippines. In Philippines, they started with about 35% SME sector. Now it has reached to about 70%. If you go back to even Singapore situation, the way back 20, 30 years ago when Lee Kuan Yew started, he got the Singaporeans to start with the smaller projects, the small entrepreneurship. And they learned from the British, the Americans, the Australians who were flocking into Singapore, looking at these green new development opportunities. Today, those small men and women who started in Singapore are the biggest entrepreneurs in the entire Asian region, including in China. They are walking into China, America, United States. They recently bought the South American, one of the biggest conglomeration for something like 150 million US dollars, and they go on buying all over the world. But these are the small men and women who started. Megapolis project is very mindful about this SME sector. And of course, I'm sure the Honorable Minister mentioned about the housing sector. We have houses, but none of us, I don't know whether the professionals can afford the houses that are going at 20 million, 30 million, 40 million. We are trying to bring down the housing prices, particularly for the professional community and the small middle class that is just beginning their life, just getting married, just got a job, and just having a life into the megapolis system. We will look, our main base would be the middle class housing, and the entrepreneurs who are just beginning their life. And that is the one, that is the economic baseline that will help the bigger boys to come and play their game. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jayasekara. I think that answers the problem that I asked. I just would like to take from that response. Now, when you say that the SMEs and the middle class development and so on, certainly it needs the policy support. It needs the assumptions that you made that, you know, this infrastructure, the SMEs will come up and there will be industrial development and so on and so forth. So with that assumption to become true, we certainly need to have this the policy-based development, and that is something Professor Amal Kumar Ge highlighted. Now, he in fact said that, okay, when it comes to policy, you need to develop policies with the top-down approach and also the bottom-up approach. Now, top-down approach you will find out from the ministries and the government, as what you say, and the minister highlighted as well. So we have identified this kind of a dream project is actually required, and you have certain assumptions. And in order to make that very efficient and fruitful, there should be support coming from the bottom as well, from the users. And in order to do that, certainly you need to have the stakeholder consultation, as he quite rightly indicated as well. And then we professionals, the engineers are in between. And this approach from the top down and the bottom up, engineers are in between. And can I ask from Professor Kumar Ge, in order to make this project a success, and in order to make this, whatever the assumptions that you make, that, you know, this will really contribute for the SME sector, industrial sector, housing, energy, trade, and all that kind of a thing, how to ensure that we developed our policies? Because in your talk, you said that the policies are not only which goes to the parliament, but of course, if you identify the projects, the programs which will get the approval, funding approval, also can be considered as an implicit policy as well. How do you set about this to ensure that this becomes a success?
Yeah, thank you, Ananda, for the question. As a follow-up to what Lakshman said, I think we're talking more about the Western Megapolis now. The Western Megapolis plan is a great vision statement, and it's good to have, it's imperative to have a vision statement coming out of many years of economic and social inaction, probably, in our country. And without a vision to build on, probably it's going to be a lost cause. So in that case, I think we need to get the best out of what the Western region or the Colombo Western province can generate in terms of improving livability, in terms of becoming a world-class center that is synonymous with what Ceylon was many years ago, or the ancient, where actually we held out a certain unique characteristic. Right now, I think we have very little to offer in terms of uniqueness to the world. Given that context, I think the Western Megapolis plan is a good document to start with, but I feel a lot more work has to be done on it in terms of bringing about the very things I spoke about, that is to ensure that the investments not only lead to outputs, but they actually lead to outcomes that will benefit the economic and the social lifestyle of the people. I believe A vision statement probably doesn't go that far, and I think as we get ready to implement these projects, I think a greater degree of study needs to be done in identifying the cost and the benefits, the stakeholders, the equitable distributions, and so on. I think as a vision statement in terms of saying, giving priority to middle-class housing in the city, in giving priority to SMEs in the manufacturing sector, I think those are excellent strategies that we have to work with. I have no problem with that. But in terms of looking at what investment will generate, particularly in terms of infrastructure, I think we need to get the numbers right. If you look at what the British did 200 years ago, or even what the Dutch did, at least in the area of transport, they got it right. They got it right, so much so that what the Dutch did actually transformed the Western province to be the leading economic power in Sri Lanka. And the British consolidated on it. We have done very little after that. So this is probably the next step forward. We can't get it wrong. So I think there's a lot more deep thinking, debate. It should not be pushed from up down, but from bottom up. I think there needs to be, I know it's said that 250 consultants and people were participating, but I think something like this needs to be discussed, not just informed, but debated and considered. I'm not saying that nothing like that happened, but I think it's the magnitude of it such that I think much greater open discussion needs to be taken as the vision statement folds out to become a practicing, living plan.
Okay, thank you. I was just also questioning about the engineers' role in this exercise as well, because as the ISL, sometimes we know that we have these seminars and we discussed about various projects, and we have many ideas coming from different perspectives, engineers giving, that's a whole idea of intellectual dialogue. And certainly we are free to analyze a problem, come out with various aspects, criticize and all that kind of a thing. But we can do that as intellectuals because we see that holistic approach. But when it goes to implementation to the next level, to the politicians, when we debate, when we come out with varying ideas, ambiguous ideas, then the politicians will find it difficult to implement, to take a decision. Now, I think as a professional body, I feel what we should do is that you deliberate, you look at every aspect, you look at the advantages, disadvantages, all of them. But when we make a recommendation to the next level for implementation, that we should go as a one voice. And in that context, to support this kind of an idea, I mean, this probably will lead to the next question to Mr. Engineer Mangalayapa as well. In the presentations we identified, again, Professor Malkumarge's presentation, that we have done the investment and we have the outputs, and some of the outputs we have, but the outcome we are not really happy. And in this context, that may be the reason that we are here in this state of affairs, in the economic status of our country, and some of the investment was not really outcome-based investment. In that context, when we engaged our professionals and engineers who are considered as nation builders, and when we consider nation builders very proudly, it is not only the infrastructure, it is also the economic contribution, economic support as well. Engineer Mangalayapa, now can you tell, okay, in order to resurrect, in order to align ourselves, in order to develop that ecosystem as engineers, what is our role to revive this or to harness, to exploit all the economic strategies or the opportunities that you mentioned in your talk?
Thank you, Professor Jayawardena. I think there is definitely a very important role that the engineers as well as most other professionals can play in this, because they are specialists on respective areas of professions, and therefore they have a domain knowledge in that area. Secondly, they are also educated citizens of the country who have gained a wealth of experience, and they can see perhaps things that others cannot see based on their education as well as experience. So they can foresee things. So that dialogue definitely has to take place. We can't wait till a perfect situation arises, an environment where that kind of dialogue's taking place. We are in transition. We can see what has gone wrong in the past and what has gone wrong in the, what has gone right in the past. We can also see what can go wrong in the future and what can go right in the future. And whether it is, and if our discussion is political and based on evidence and facts and figures, I think then there shouldn't be any hesitancy, as far as I am concerned, as a professional, in expressing that thing. Of course, that may have, like you said, certain repercussions. That's something we all have to face. Because as professionals, you express opinions based on what you believe, and you are subject to correction if proven otherwise, because as professionals, we also have to respect other views that is coming in, take them on board, and work within the limits of professional discourse. And I really don't see that as a problem. So this, unfortunately, due to various, perceptions, various issues, we tend to not necessarily engage in that dialogue. I think it is, in that context, doing it as a collective body rather than an individual is a better way. And within the institutions, we need to develop consensus on some of these areas. There had to be a lot of debate and discussion within the institutions, within the professions, and maybe go into minute detail and then look at every aspect, but come up with a comprehensive, holistic, consensual view on that idea, and that can come as an input to this whole process of consultation and dialogue. Naturally, this can, it is not an easy task. I can see that happening many a times. It's not an easy task because, we all want to believe what we think as right. But I tend to believe that we need to look at, when you are trying to look at issues holistically, we have to always listen to the others as well. So the dialogue has to be there, like Kamal said, and it's a good point to start. A lot more has to be done. But that deep discussion has to take place, whether it is encouraged or whether it is facilitated by the top or not. As institutions, we can take that as a starting point and then go into detailed discussion, and the outcomes of those discussions can be presented as, okay, we've deliberated, this is what we see as the issue. Would you have a different view on this thing? And I'm sure that can help to take the dialogue.
Thank you. I think the ISL has been doing that to some extent, but I think we need to do it better as we go ahead. So with that, let me open the floor for the questions, and all the engineers who are here, who I'm sure that they must be having many questions in these areas. Can I take these questions? Please identify yourself and also be succinct in answering or giving your ideas and so on. And also, we will discuss within the framework of the subject area that we have been discussing as well. Please, yeah, thank you.
I'm Engineer Hamid. My question goes to Mr. Yapa, Engineer Yapa. Well, now we hear in the media that there's a lot of shortages in the skilled labor, like masons, carpenters, and all other skilled construction workers. And there's a huge, big plan on this megapolis to build mega cities and all. So when there is a culture of resistance from various professional groups through this EDCA and all, not to import labor from other countries where it is excess that they can supply. How we are going to deliver these projects. And also, what I see is for Sri Lankans, they are very happy to go and work in all part of the world, the professionals. They want them to be welcome in Middle East, Europe, but they don't want anyone to come and work with us here. So, can you explain this, please?
Very difficult to explain, but I may have to go back to my personal experience. I had the same problem in DocCat because maintaining a very large pool of technocrats, whether it is engineers, whether it is welders, fitters, electricians, or shipbuilding, whatever trades, is not an easy. When I reached, I would say, to divisional level in DocCat, majority of the people who were present in DocCat in engineering categories during my time have left DocCat. So I always say I was privileged because all the better ones have gone. So since they left, I got the opportunity. That's a positive way of looking at it. Had they been there, I wouldn't have been the managing director because they are better ones. Certainly they were very good. They all moved out for betterment of their life situations. But that doesn't prevent the organization to go on. You have to find your own way. What did we do? We looked at why people are going out. The organization culture had major problems. There was no inclusiveness. So it was not only engineers, even the workers started going out. Because, you know, I can remember at some stage we were doing quality assurance. I was the quality assurance manager. We wanted to introduce welder qualification and certification and hand over the, you know, have every welder to wear the badge that he's a certified welder so that we guarantee the welding in the minds of the customer and we make sure the process is controlled. The management says, don't touch it. The moment you give the certificates to these guys, they're going to go to a job agent and say, I'm a Lloyd's grade such and such qualified welder and go away. We don't give the certificates to them. But it doesn't help. You don't need to have the Lloyd's certificates as long as you are competent. You know that you can do that welding. He goes, give me a trade test. I'll prove myself that I can do this testing. And he goes away. So we had to come out with many strategies how to make these people to come back to us. Of course, it is expensive. But then you need to also parallelly improve your productivity. Cut down your transaction costs and other things. Bring about products that can sell. So I think you as entrepreneurs, as managers, as business entities, there's a lot that needs to be done to get the people to work. I know Sri Lanka, I hear, I'm not a civil engineer, now we are going into high-rise building and certain heights and above, there is hardly anybody in Sri Lanka, particularly at lower levels, who want to go up and work in that district. So those are also challenges. So I believe these are challenges any economy has to face, not only Sri Lanka, because you have a limited number of employees, employable labor force. How do we transform our employable labor force to take up new jobs? How do you remunerate them? How do you get them to perform better? How do you make the whole industry more productive? So we need to get out of our traditional approach and look at how to make that work, at least to the extent that I can say we were great extent successful in that. Of course, it has its financial and other implications and ramifications. Our attrition came down to about 0.5%, which I think was remarkable. In the case of engineers, it came down to about 2%, because there were still some people who felt that they have better opportunities elsewhere after 5 years of service in DocCat.
Yeah, I think your question basically is on the human resource aspect. You know, how do you satisfy the human resource needs when you consider skill requirements and so on. I think Mr. Engineer Mangalayapa, basically what it needs is to ensure that required human resources in whatever the form should be made available. So, which basically means that I think to me is an alignment of all the players to the same objective. Obviously, I think we have a role to play in the universities to ensure that sufficient number of engineers are passing out. The government has a responsibility to allocate resources to the universities, allowing the universities to expand. And we have other bodies like CEDA, and they need to find out and come out with the policies to attract people to the industry, provide incentives. And I think where you need to align all the players and to have the ecosystem, I think that is what is missing in Sri Lanka most of the time. And as role players, we need to find out exactly how to address all these aspects. So otherwise, you will see that the projects, their funding is coming, but no people to work. And how do you get the people? So that's the kind of problem that you have. Yeah, so we have a question from the back. Sorry, you have a mic with you? Yeah. Engineer S.S. Pereira, you have a mic with you? No? Can we then?
I'm Professor Anul Pereira, University of Moratuwa. Thank you very much for the very, very nice presentations, which were very educational and also thought-provoking. Now, my question is, we have, in Sri Lanka, we have been spending a lot of money on infrastructure, right? We have constructed roads all over the countryside where, in certain areas there are no vehicles, no population, but roads are there, right? And at the same time, most of these lands, which were early used for various, industries have been acquired, and large extents of roads have been constructed. And now the government is having a time and a half trying to pay back loans with interest and so on, right? Now, in that kind of context, where we have been very, very interested in constructing, infrastructure, which of course was good for engineers, because all these top-class construction companies had plenty of work to do at the expense of poor people who have to pay tax to cover all these costs. Now, Professor Kumarge's, one sentence was very, very interesting, right? We should be more worried about the outcome than the output, right? So in that context, now with all these, various mega projects have been becoming failures, right? Of course, which we should learn, because failures are the pillars of success, right? Now with all these failures, now again we are trying to go for another mega massive project without trying to understand what kind of outcome we are going to achieve, right? We may feel that the entire country will be very, very prosperous, everybody's standard of living will go up and so on after you have these megapolis, right? And at the same time, now we have already developed infrastructure in the south, right? How are we going to productively use this infrastructure? I think we should have a policy of industrialization which should either precede or go hand in hand with this kind of infrastructure development. Now we have massive, for example, since I am a chemical engineer, I will speak a few words on my area, right? We have a massive mineral deposit at Eppavala. We have a massive deposit of mineral sands at Pulmude, right? We have the sea around us, right? And we haven't thought of any kind of industrial development based on those raw materials. But we are going pell-mell with infrastructure. We are constructing roads all over. Now those days, let's say, I will just take a simple example, right? We went to Katharagama on that particular road which was there in existence for 40, 50, maybe 70 years. We had a nice time. It was a vacation. We went to Katharagama, had a good time, worshipped, and came back. It took 2 days, right? And it was a trip. But now we want to go at high speed, 100 kilometers per hour to Katharagama, right? And then come back the same day. What is the advantage, right? So these things should be looked at, right? You can't just look at provision of engineering projects for engineers or constructing massive buildings for the rest of the world to see that we are a developed country, right?
Engineer S.S. Pereira, can you brief in the question that you want to ask?
That is what I'm trying to say. Now, what I'm saying is, right, with all these experience that we have already had, I think when we go for projects, let's look at, right, the entire gamut of the project. Let's see how it is going to, the benefits trickle down to the grassroots level. So can we have some kind of explanation from all these panelists, if you are, agreeable to the question, my logic, right? And explain how these megapolis projects and all these other things which are being proposed by the government without thinking, or maybe they are trying to get the private sector to invest, right? How this is going to help the country's development in the future, and how we are going to make dollars, right? And make the country sustainable in its economic future. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we discussed that one to some extent at the very beginning, and I would like to ask Mr. Jayasekara or any other panelist, Engineer Mangalayappa or Professor Malkumarage, anything else you want to add on this one exactly as to how to? One question that he raised is basically how to make use of the existing infrastructure that you think is not really outcome-based infrastructure. Can we come out with a strategy to make them outcome-based? And also to add anything else to make our investments more outcome-based.
Maybe I'll take a lead, because you referred to Hambantota now. The point in question is, we have a port as well as an airport, international level airport, and a port which has been built and readily available, but no cargo and passengers. So we've been striving hard to get that operational. So one aspect, several approaches that we have taken, what is necessary is to use the port as well as the airport as hubs for global value addition and re-export to the regional markets, because that is where the connectivity helps you to build upon. So we are looking at substantially large industrial parks around the port, perhaps spanning to maybe 5,000-6,000 or even up to 15,000 acres of industrial parks in stages, where international investors could come and set up their facilities for value addition, either the raw materials or semi-finished products being shipped to those facilities, value added, and then re-exported to the other markets. Now that's because now you can't ship the port or the airport. You can't just erase them out because they are already done. They are there. So you need to create cargo around that, adopting policies that will help to attract such investment, and then creating the employment opportunity and the skills that is necessary for Sri Lankans to work in them, providing other infrastructure requirements like the power, water, various other utilities to transform economic activities in this area. So if I, like I mentioned in my presentation, you are looking at about, if you take those 5 districts, you are looking at about a population of about 4 million. That's almost 20% of Sri Lanka's population in that area. How going forward that they can engage in a more developed economic activity in these surrounding these things. So that's where I said we need to look at those regions. So he mentioned about Pulmude and various other areas. Perhaps you need to take those development dynamics into account and then come up with solutions that can, because we may not necessarily have everything. We may have a raw material, we may have some other things, but we may not have everything. So then the policy has to support to get all those, the rest of the balanced things done. So that may be one way forward, and that will improve exports, that will improve our balance of trade, that will improve employment in terms of outcomes, that will also create economic development. But from a policy perspective, then we need to address the policy needs to enable that kind of environment. Exactly. If you don't do that,
he mentioned about this industrial policy. Engineer S. Pereira, Professor Malkumarage, can you talk about this policy aspect that he mentioned in order to make sure that we integrate all this?
Yeah, I would like to go back to the question that was asked by Engineer Hamid also about our human resource requirement.
See, all of these are symptomatic of lack of visible, sustainable development in Sri Lanka. Okay? Even though very often projects are implemented on political timelines, which is important for a government to get re-elected. There's no question about that. Finally, however, the people are now gradually becoming more aware of gauging real economic progress and social sustainability. Even today, many young engineers, professionals, are giving up on living and working in Sri Lanka. And I think still the tide is sadly outbound and not inbound. And that is probably a good gauge to see whether hope has been restored, that policies are in place, sustainability is in place, and I believe most Sri Lankans love this country enough that if they see future, they will stay. And they'll come back. So I think this is where we need to take the country to. And I quite agree that these are probably, to me, better signs of actually hope for the future than seeing skyscrapers and expressways and elevated highways. Not that those are unimportant, but those are probably rather misleading symptoms of progress, particularly if we can't attract people. Money, it's not only money, we talked about FDIs, actually, Mangala talked about FDIs. Yes, certainly we have a lack of capital and so on, but what about the labor to work all this? Both at the professional and at the skill level, we may have to depend, we are already depending on expatriate labor, expatriate professionals for this, so going on mega projects, finally we might be building a country for others, I don't know.
Jackson, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, actually, this evening, the most interesting question so far came from Mr. Pereira, talking about different aspects of this entire development challenge. I think this forum is trying to tackle many issues which we don't have really a graph or we don't have the ability to tackle at one go. I think let's not kid ourselves that we are trying to get all the problems together and go on a one-shot knockout situation. I think due to the reasons that our country has gone through so much, so within such a short time, has created the current deficiencies and dichotomies and most of these issues. So we shall not forget the fact that we just came out, so to say. I mean, even during last 10 years, I mean, we are talking about Hambantota. We went and invested such a lot, and what is the benefit of that to the country as a nation? So we have come out of a major, I wouldn't call it a disastrous period, but a misleading, and there was no really a contribution to the nation as such. I think we have to accept. Then before that, the war. Now, in that context, if just building the infrastructure may be a kind of a illusion that the leadership and the politician wants to create, that we just came out, we do this, we do that, and that we can come out. So I really agree that just building the mega infrastructure is not the solution. And there is no way that it can cure all the issues that were there. So I'm, as putting a team together and keeping the people together, I always try to push the team and the politicians towards getting into more fundamental issues like what I mentioned about the small man to be given a chance, small man to be given a house, and small man to be made able and capable man. I think that is something that we can lose sight in the midst of negotiating with big countries like India, China, Singapore, America, and all that. We might lose the fact that we have to, at the end of the day, look after our own people, our own the people who are just getting educated. That brings me to the issue and another contradiction of the issue of the skill labor availability. In fact, megapolis cannot be done the way it is planned with this availability of skilled labor and unskilled labor and whatever the labor requirement that we are going to have. It cannot be simply done. We have to import people from I don't know what. As I think Amal said, there will be projects left, there will be investment left, and there will be no takers or no learners, most unfortunately. So this is a major defect in the system. But see what happens. You try to build a university, and there are all kind of strikes and defection going on. Therefore, you cannot get the private sector to build the university. No, strangely, even the government doesn't build any more universities. It appears, putting up a block here, block there. Is this the way the government can attack this particular issue of the skilled labor? I saw advertisement, NSB, there is a university with some beautiful picture of a resident campus with a green area, NSB. I was so happy. Here it is. At least we are going to get some students coming out as whatever the qualification they have. This is a major issue with regard to the skill development. And at least if the NSB can't do ASB or IPB or whatever, I think we need more universities. Now, realizing this, Megapolis in its first project at IT Park, starting from Malambe going up to Panipitiya, we have now started allocating lands mainly for the government universities, hoping and expecting that the government also will deliver a few universities, so that the 100,000 students who are passing at a very high level, the advanced level, may find a place to go. Not these university cadets that are located all along the Gold Road and Duplication Road, now extending up to Nugegoda and going beyond to Maharagama. So those are the kind of universities that our people are going to get into. So let us, I think, not only through the Megapolis, but the government educational policies, get this right, get our students into not only universities, vocational centers and the various centers. I only see that as a way out. Then we will have the projects ready where they can be employed and they can really stay inside the country. I just wanted to touch upon one thing that was mentioned, this trickle-down effect. Now, we in Megapolis do not believe in this trickle-down effect. Trickle-down effect means that you do a large project and expect man on the road and man in the village to benefit and have the employment, have the batkades and have all the thriving in their economic situation. This has not happened in any other country. It has not happened in UK. What happened, in fact, in the UK, they built houses and houses. All the houses were bought over by the rich people coming from abroad, and as a result, the local people in UK were not able to afford a house. Now, realizing this, Singapore government always maintained two sectors of housing. The small man, the middle class man, the working class man, even today, buy a house for 200,000 Sing dollars. That's about 20 million rupees for a rich country like Singapore. That's a very small price to pay. While the normal housing prices was about $1 million plus, going up to $5-6 million. Now, trickle-down effect of a major industrial or development of a commercial nature will not take care of that man of $200,000 or the man who can afford 10 million, 20 million, coming down to the rupees. Our professionals who are starting the life cannot afford a house more than, in my estimation, 4 million to 5 million rupees. You may be surprised. Even to raise a loan for 4 million rupees or 5 million, you need to have a salary of 100,000 rupees minimum, and there should be some other income. And many of the youngsters who are starting their life, maybe as engineers or architects or any other profession, do not start with that kind of a savings, that kind of payment capacity. So we have to bring in the prices, and we may be have to have these two categories: the people who can afford, who wants the luxury, who wants to live in the luxury. They can probably pay a higher rate, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million upward. And the speculators who are coming to Sri Lanka now, both in Sri Lankan investors and the foreign investors who are buying the houses for the purpose of speculation, can also really be a menace to the megapolis concept.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. And in the interest of time, I will just have one quick round of questions, but we will not go one by one. If anybody have questions, you just raise your hands. We will take 2-3 questions together, and I will request the panelists to give brief answers. There was one question here. You would like?
Yeah, I am Viplanandan. My question goes to Professor Amal Kumar.
Yes.
Now, the theme for today is national policies and the voice of engineers in respect of that. So national policies cover a whole plethora of aspects. Now here, we have gone a bit astray about the pros and cons of projects and the impact the projects will have on the society as a whole. But projects as a short-term endeavor, it may come and go. But as a society, as a nation, we have to have a policy that should stand valid irrespective of the magnitude of the project or whatever. But here, we are missing the tree for woods or wood for the tree. Really, actually, Professor Amal Kumarage has, he opened my eyes by stating the policy, implicit policy and explicit policy. So do we have a think tank for our nation? I think in India they have think tank, but we don't have a think tank to develop policies for the politicians to build on and implement them. So here, is it possible? Now we are dragged along the ways in the direction of, we are treading the projects, but without checking whether the outcome or output or whatever against the stated policies. So Professor Amal Kumarage, is it possible to carry on with this without having a clear-cut stated policies as a baseline or benchmark to always check with? Or do we have a firefighting or then and there all the way you go without having an explicit stated policy? Because,
okay, thank you for the question, and we have 1 or 2 questions we'll quickly take. You have a question here? Yes. Mike?
Question to Professor Amal Kumarage. He gave some definition for this policy. Once the parliament allocate some money for some objective of work, it becomes a policy, one of the definitions given. Am I right or wrong? If I am wrong, please correct me. Then what is the use if the parliament allocates some money for some work and automatically it becomes, according to the definitions given, a policy? Then what is the purpose of the making national policies like that if parliament can do everything?
Thank you. And Engineer Diallo Mendis, you had a question, right? Yes. You just give the mic there. There. Yeah. I would really appreciate if you could be very brief, Engineer Diallo Mendis.
Yes, I knew you would say that. I left Kandy this morning at 5:50 to get to the railway station and sat in the so-called express train for 2 hours before it started. Now I have delivered this statement to the former general manager. Priyal, is he here? And he advised me to write a letter to the GMR. I said, yes, I have decided to do that anyway. Okay? A few other things. But I only will say one question. When you talk about national politics and do not mention water, you have missed out on one of the essentials. There are 3 essentials in development. You can take them in order you like. Water, land, and people. Or people, land, and water. Or people, water, and land. I have a library of books on this subject. And you're welcome to borrow them, provided you read them and sit for a paper to show that you have read them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One more question, and then we will give the opportunity for the panelists, and then we will close with that. Yes, question there?
With regard to the Megapolis project, about the planning stage, have we spent enough time debating about the Megapolis project? Did we have enough time for a public debate, or did we have enough time to have a good debate within IESL? Because some countries give enough time. I mean, if you think about the UK, now the single largest construction project happening in the United Kingdom is the Crossrail project. It was first mooted in 1974. It is only happening now. And if you think about the HS2, they are discussing about that for last 3 or 4 years. So why I'm asking the question is, I don't want economist Professor Sali to come back in 25 years' time and tell Sri Lanka has failed again. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And I will request the panelists, you can also briefly answer all the questions together and perhaps give a closing remarks as we are approaching the finishing time. Thank you. We'll start with Professor Ma.
Yeah,
the questions are for you.
There were Yeah, there were 2 questions asked. One was in terms of whether these policies are actually being ignored. The other was if Parliament can approve projects, and then why have policies? I'll answer the second question first. That's why I said that we need to have explicit policies. The others are basically time-based, because this year you can allocate funds and next year you cannot allocate funds. So that happens when a government changes, sometimes even when the minister changes, the projects start. So those are really not policies. They are expressions of policy, but they are not real policy. So we do need to have a system whereby, as you correctly said, there should be think tanks that are always, I mean, if you go to countries like the US and even India, they have permanent think tanks on each sector that are actually developing policies and legislation and so on. Ministers come, secretaries come and they go, but the policy work just keeps going on and on. And I think this is probably one of the weakest areas that we have, and I think we need to put that right. Infrastructure projects are needed. We need to show visibility. We need to win the confidence of the people. We cannot have time till think tanks are set up and people are in place to develop these. Those have been set up in other countries over the years, and they are actually functioning very well now. But we should not ignore those. I think that's where concepts like the megapolis can be redirected. I think if you look at Mahaveli, I think Engineer Tilak, is talking about projects in the US that were conceived 30, 40 years ago, which have been done now. So good projects may not be done immediately. They may be hatched, improved on, debated, and conceived over a period of time and implemented when the social, economic, political culture is right. And I think that's the wise way to go. We, of course, don't do any of such incubation. We just hatch them and then put them out. And I think this is where we lose most. And endeavors, investments all become very suboptimal when that happens. So I think I'm answering both questions in a way that going back to explicit policies, having permanent policy dialogue, having bottom-up approaches, professional input, this is the culture that we need to create to really have policy-led development. Of course, we can have many other type of developments, which is this country is not, we are not strange to that kind of development. We are also well aware of where that kind of development takes us.
I think taking a cue from what Amal said, yes, national policies and policy
development, policy improvement, policy implementation, these are topmost priorities. I'm not a spokesperson for the government, but now that I have started engaging more and maybe closely working with them, I can share some thinking. Yes, that's also the, I would say, somewhat of the understanding of the government to focus on national policies. There are so many ministers and ministries. If you look at the Prime Minister's ministry, he is Minister of National Policy and Economic Affairs. So it itself says there is national policy envisaged. And policy development is being looked at under the new act that is being discussed. I have been somewhat aware of what is in it. So there is this coming of creation of national policies on many areas. And then getting it to the parliament, getting it approved, so that there is explicit policies, as Amal says, going forward. But I do agree that time is running out, and we have a small window of opportunities that is before us, because we are in a global competition. The whole world is not going to wait till we do all that and come back. So there is pressure on time on one side. There is the need for development of policies, need for consultation and getting it right. So my take is that this is going to happen parallelly. We don't have a choice as I see as of now. There may be dangers in that. We need to be cognizant of that. But nevertheless, that's something, since we have not done something in the past, and we need to get there, we may have to do it. So, but while doing that, I think proactive engagement and consultation is an essential part. We should not lose that opportunity. ISL and others must make use of that opportunity and do that.
Thank you. You repeated that. Mr. Jayasekara, anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I will in very short say three things. One is I totally agree with Professor Amal Kumarage. There should have been a continuous and consistent policy-making bodies, think tank in this country. In fact, there is a history of doing that. We had the Central Planning Commission followed by the Indian model and National Physical Planning Commission that has approved plans after plan for the whole country. But at that time, no, none of the government have taken those things seriously. And anyway, I don't want to talk about the Mahavali, which was a 30-year plan which was brought down to 6 years. Now, I want to tell the audience that maybe the middle class and the professionals can wait, but most of the poor people in this country cannot wait till the projects happen in 10 years, 15 years, deliberation in a very cozy way for a long, long period. And that is unaffordable for a country of Sri Lanka's current state. And there's no, I mean, shuttering down middle class, the poverty and the housing problem. Look at the transport problem which we are dealing with. There are problems that cannot be delayed tackling with. So therefore, we have to segregate the projects that have to be done now and the projects that cannot wait and deliberated upon. The one last one that I want to mention in relation to the megapolis plan, when we conceived the projects out of the plan, we said that we allocated some projects as the socially important projects which can be funded by the government or government to government, and most of the projects, almost 90% of the projects were allocated for the private sector. Now I see a change of mind. Sometime the governments and the funding stream that are coming online pick up some of those projects that are allocated for the private sector, entrepreneurship, PPP system, which can add in lot of credibility and capabilities into the national intellectual level. For example, when you do a project on a PPP system, it is the private sector ingenuity, management capability and the capital that comes with the government sector capabilities and the machinery. And that kind of things, I wonder whether we have been overlooking, and as a result, some of the private sector enabled projects are going to the loan system, government system, and some of the government system projects are going into the private sector. There's a mix-up. So this is some area where the professionals can really come in, and that is the kind of deliberation that is more suitable to the current state, rather than going backward on the, the plan and the some little fine-tuning. bigger projects and the bigger issues should be addressed by the professional community right now without further delay and engage with the government rather than disengage with the government. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that was repeatedly mentioned that when we talked about the policy, everything will depend on the policy and policy implementation and things like that. As it was mentioned that we want to see after several years that we didn't have a good policy, this and that. So what is important and what was highlighted is that we should not be quiet about it, and we should always give our ideas and support. And when we come out with those kind of our input through think tanks or whatever, our inputs to the government, I'm sure that the government will take those kind of ideas on board in their own policy making and in their own manifestos and all that kind of a thing. I think that's a message probably for the presidents to perhaps consider having think tanks in various areas. We had some ideas earlier as well, but it didn't really materialize. And if you can really do, we have submitted some proposals like railway electrification and so on. If you can come out with these, that is coming up now, right? Railway electrification. I think likewise, if we can come out with those kind of policies as policy documents, support documents to the government, probably we can influence this policy making. With that, there is one question to be given to the minister. I think we can probably pass it to the president ISL to give to the minister. And the question to the minister is that composition of an ideal parliament. And can we come out with some numbers for the number of engineers, lawyers, accountants, planners, artists, and all of them in the parliament, without politicians. Right, so that's a question. Right, let me take this opportunity to appreciate all the three panelists here, Professor Amal Kumarage, Engineer Mangalayappa, and also Engineer Lakshman Jayasekara. You, although it was a substitute, you did a marvelous job, really. Having the subject by heart and all that, and coming out with various ideas. Thank you so much, all of you, three of you, for coming out and sharing your ideas for the benefit of our engineers and wonderful audience as well. You came out with your ideas, very enthusiastic to see what's happening. And I think we need to take from here on board and to support the government or the economic development through the input to the policies and by practicing our own professions in the way that was mentioned. So let us give a round of appreciation to... Let me also thank all of you. Can I hand over the mic to Arun for closing remarks?
So we echo those sentiments, and we do appreciate everything that was discussed and the active participation, but we haven't concluded until we had Dr. S.B. Wijakon hand over a token of appreciation to our moderator, Professor Jayawarna. Thank you. And we insist on one little thing, that all of you remain until Dr. Wijakon has concluded speaking.
So I will not take more than hopefully 3 minutes, so please don't go out, okay? Thank you. Because already the hall is empty. So Engineer Vimalsena Gamage, President of the ISL, past presidents, President-elect, Vice President and Council members, fellow ISL members, conference speakers and moderators, special invitees, sponsors, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor of delivering the vote of thanks to bring this National Engineering Conference 2016 to a successful close. Organized by the Institution of Engineers, Sri Lanka, this is the third conference since the inaugural conference held in October 2013. Held under the theme, National Policies, Voice of Engineers. This conference brought together, as it did at its earlier two events, eminent speakers in the sphere of varied engineering disciplines and the corporate sector and private sector. They shared the expertise, knowledge, and experience to give all of us the confidence to take up challenges in making our voice heard. So I would like to thank our Chief Guest, Honorable Minister for Special Assignments, Dr. Sarath Amulugama, and also I would like to thank the Honorable Patli Champika Ranawaka, Minister of Megapolis and Western Region Development, for participating here and making presentations. And secondly, I would like to thank the eminent panel speakers of the conference. Mr. Gamini Gunawardena, Mr. Ranjit Panditage, Engineer Professor Amal Kumarage, and Engineer Mangala Yapa, and also two moderators, Professor Anand Javadana and Dr. Tirak Siambalapiti. Next, I thank the National Engineering Conference Organizing Committee for their hard work to ensure the success of this conference. My special thanks goes to Malik Kannangar and his assistant, Ms. Dayakanti, for their hard work. I also thank Engineer Dr. Jagat Piris, CU Executive Secretary and Deputy Executive Secretary, Mrs. Bhadra Jayavira, and staff of the IVSL who are in full force here today at the conference as well as organizing this conference for the last couple of weeks. I also thank the sponsors of this conference, Platinum sponsor Diesel and Motor Engineering PLC, Gold sponsor Maga Engineering Private Limited, Silver sponsor United Tractors Equipment Private Limited, Printed Media sponsor Vijay Newspapers Limited, Electronic Media sponsor RTV. I would like to thank our veteran compeer, Mr. Arun Dias, for conducting the event in a fitting manner. I also thank the head of the departments and institution heads to send engineers to participate in this conference, and also all of you, the participants for this conference. Finally, I would like to thank the management and staff of the Waters Edge for their fullest cooperation to organize this conference venue successfully. Also, I need to apologize for one or two criticisms came out at the discussions where maybe little mishaps and delay in starting the conference, and I think these are beyond the organizers' control. However, we make a note of it, and so that we will have these lapses addressed in coming events of the IESL. Finally, thank you very much, all of you, and please pardon me if I missed any person whose contribution to the success of this event during my vote of thanks. Thank you very much.